Crowds gathered in polished shoes and sharp suits, all eyes on the stage as the CEO prepared to address a global audience. The room pulsed with expectation, and the world watched in anticipation of another power move. But then, a sudden pause. A crucial interpreter, gone. Silence wrapped around the moment like a noose. People whispered, fidgeted, confused and on edge. That's when someone unexpected stepped forward. Not a translator. Not a diplomat. A janitor. His mop still damp, his uniform wrinkled, he cleared his throat. And in that moment, the narrative shifted, forever. Before we begin, comment where you're watching from. We love seeing how far these stories travel. The Grand Meridian International Business Forum was the kind of event that drew in the titans of industry and the brightest minds in innovation. Held annually in a luxurious European convention center, this summit hosted leaders from finance, technology, policy, and media. Invitations were gold-edged, and the guest list included billionaires, diplomats, and tech visionaries from around the globe. The venue sparkled with chandeliers, and every seat was occupied. Major deals, trend-setting speeches, and unexpected announcements were the norm. But this year, anticipation buzzed strongest for one man's appearance, CEO Alexander Rothwell. His keynote was advertised weeks in advance, and the world tuned in to hear him announce a groundbreaking multinational merger. Everything was perfectly timed, from stage lighting to camera angles. Translators for multiple languages were ready. Except, as the CEO approached the podium, the interpreter designated for his native tongue was nowhere to be found. A critical link in a global broadcast had snapped. The room tensed. Whispers surged like a wave. The confident, perfectly polished event was seconds from unraveling, and it all hinged on a voice that had gone missing. Alexander Rothwell wasn't just any CEO. He was a symbol of relentless ambition and unmatched discipline. Starting from a modest tech startup, he had clawed his way up to build one of the most profitable and influential companies in the world. His leadership style was cold, calculated, and effective. To his admirers, he was a visionary. To his competitors, a storm to avoid. His rare public appearances drew massive attention, and this summit was no exception. His speech promised to unveil a cross-continental partnership that could redefine markets and influence global trade policy. The press was eager, the investors more so. But as Rothwell stood before the crowd, the absence of his interpreter turned the spotlight into a furnace. His opening words hung in the air, undeciphered by half the audience. The power dynamic shifted in seconds. For a man who planned for every contingency, this was an unthinkable gap. As murmurs grew and the stage manager froze, Rothwell's jaw tightened. He scanned the crowd, searching for a solution. Every second of silence was a blow to his reputation. Then, from the back of the room, a soft but confident voice offered, "I can translate." Heads turned. Only hours before the event, the interpreter was seen in the green room, calm and composed, reviewing technical terminology from the speech draft. He was handpicked due to his credentials, having served as a UN translator and fluent in over 6 languages. His disappearance was not just unexpected, it was baffling. There had been no security alert, no medical emergency called in, and no backup plan. One minute he was preparing, the next, gone. Organizers searched frantically, calls went unanswered, and no plausible explanation surfaced. The interpreter's equipment sat untouched on the podium. Rumors began to circulate. Had he suffered a health issue? Was this sabotage from a competing firm? Or simply an embarrassing logistical failure? The audience was left in a tense purgatory, and Rothwell, despite his composure, couldn't hide the growing storm in his eyes. Just as tech staff whispered about canceling or delaying the speech, a janitor stepped forward. His posture unassuming, his face familiar yet forgotten by most. "I can help," he repeated, this time louder. At first, people thought it was a joke. But then he stepped closer, and the impossible began to take shape. Luis Rivera had been part of the cleaning crew at the Grand Meridian for nearly 6 years. Every day he polished the marble floors, emptied trash bins in glass-walled offices, and cleaned up the leftovers of meetings he was never invited to. Most people didn't know his name, let alone his story. They walked past him, eyes fixed on their phones or their next deal. But Luis noticed everything. He listened. He absorbed. Beneath the faded blue uniform and calloused hands was a man once brimming with ambition and skill few would believe. Luis had studied linguistics in his home country and even earned a scholarship to continue his education abroad. But when his father fell ill, he dropped out to support his family. Immigration struggles, rising bills, and the weight of responsibility pushed him into custodial work. Yet he never stopped practicing. He read in 5 languages, translated subtitles for free online, and kept dictionaries in his locker. When he heard the CEO's interpreter had vanished, something stirred inside him. It wasn't arrogance. It was duty. And for once, someone needed the skills he had quietly carried for years. When Luis stepped forward and offered to translate, the reaction was instant disbelief. Some chuckled nervously, others frowned in confusion. The idea that a janitor could replace a professional interpreter at a high-stakes international summit seemed absurd. But Rothwell's piercing gaze didn't waver. He looked at Luis, not with arrogance but curiosity. "Do you speak both languages fluently?" he asked. Luis responded instantly in the CEO's native tongue. Not a hint of hesitation. Just calm confidence. The room shifted. Security glanced at the event manager, unsure whether to stop him. The host hesitated, then nodded slightly. Rothwell gave a curt gesture to proceed. Luis stepped beside the podium, smoothed the front of his shirt, and adjusted the mic. All eyes were on him, some skeptical, some intrigued. The CEO began his address, and Luis translated the first few lines. His voice was rich, measured, and articulate. The crowd sat still, stunned by his seamless delivery. The moment felt surreal. The man who just cleaned the floors had now stepped into the spotlight, and his presence commanded unexpected respect. Alexander Rothwell launched into his keynote, and with every sentence, Luis echoed his words in flawless English. It wasn't just that he translated accurately. He captured the rhythm, the urgency, and the nuance. Business jargon, cultural idioms, and industry-specific phrases flowed naturally. Luis wasn't just relaying words. He was interpreting meaning, shaping ideas, and preserving tone. The audience stopped shifting in their seats. Phones lowered. Even skeptical reporters began taking notes, not just on the speech, but on the man translating it. Luis matched Rothwell's pace with ease, never interrupting, never falling behind. He even adjusted the phrasing where necessary to make complex ideas easier to grasp for non-native listeners. It was the kind of performance expected from top-tier interpreters paid thousands per hour. And here was a janitor, unpaid, unscheduled, and unseen until now. Every second he spoke erased assumptions. When Rothwell paused and gestured, the applause that followed was as much for Luis as it was for the CEO. It became clear to everyone present that this summit wouldn't be remembered for its business deal, but for the voice that had unexpectedly led it. As the speech continued, memories flooded Luis's mind like old photographs. He remembered scribbling phonetic notes in the margins of language textbooks, volunteering as a translator at local events, and spending hours mimicking BBC accents in front of a cracked mirror. There was a time he had dreamt of becoming a UN interpreter, traveling the world and bridging voices across cultures. But dreams, no matter how vivid, can sometimes be buried by life's demands. He had sacrificed his education to work multiple jobs after his father's health crisis. Cleaning offices wasn't a passion, it was survival. And yet, he never let go of what he loved. Each night after work, he'd sit at the kitchen table, practicing syntax and idioms while his children slept. His wife encouraged him, but they both knew opportunities were scarce. Still, he prepared, not for an audience, but for himself. And now, in the most unlikely moment, All those years of quiet effort had found their reason. The world may not have seen him before, but now it couldn't look away. At the beginning of the interruption, the audience was agitated, some visibly irritated by the delay, others doubtful of the janitor's sudden offer. But as Luis continued translating, their expressions began to shift. The doubt softened into interest, and interest melted into admiration. Executives leaned forward in their chairs. The delegation from Japan whispered to one another, nodding in approval. Social media feeds filled with live reactions, videos, and hashtags. Hashtag janitor interpreter and hashtag voice from the shadows started trending within minutes. People who had walked past Luis every day were now seeing him clearly for the first time. Some attendees even felt ashamed as they recalled moments they had ignored him, when he held the elevator, cleaned their spilled coffee, or greeted them in the halls. In that moment, the room transformed. It wasn't just about a speech anymore. It became a reflection on who we overlook and why. As the speech neared its conclusion, the applause grew more frequent, not just polite, but thunderous, genuine, and even a little emotional. The crowd had been moved, not by power, but by quiet, brilliant humility. Alexander Rothwell was known for being unflinching, always composed under pressure. But as Luis translated his final statements, something different flickered in his eyes, a quiet respect. This wasn't just about salvaging a speech. It was about witnessing something rare, competence without ego, brilliance without a resume. Rothwell turned slightly toward Luis, and for the first time that day, his stern demeanor softened. His thank you was brief, but sincere, and as he extended his hand, the entire room rose in a standing ovation. Photographers captured the moment, the powerful CEO and the janitor-turned-interpreter, side by side, framed by flags and digital screens. Rothwell, who had flown in with a team of strategists and PR handlers, now found that the most memorable part of his presentation had come from someone who wasn't even on the guest list. He leaned in and said something quietly to Luis, something the microphones didn't catch. But Luis nodded, his eyes wide with disbelief. And though Rothwell rarely improvised, he added an unscripted closing remark, "Greatness doesn't always wear a title." After the speech ended, the backstage corridor buzzed like a beehive. Staff members offered Rothwell water, managers apologized profusely, and media teams scrambled for quotes. But Rothwell waved them off, pointing instead to Luis, who stood quietly near the curtain, back in his janitor's stance. "Bring him in," the CEO said. Within minutes, Luis was seated across from one of the most powerful men in business, still unsure if he was in trouble or being thanked. Rothwell's tone was calm, but curious. "Where did you learn to do that?" he asked. Luis shared his story, humbly and without embellishment. Rothwell listened, then leaned forward. "I don't believe in accidents," he said. "You were here for a reason." He offered Luis a position, full-time, well-paid, and with the respect he deserved, as a personal language consultant for the company. Travel, training, growth, the works. Luis hesitated, still gripping his mop handle. "Will I still be cleaning floors?" he asked with a half-smile. Rothwell shook his head. "Not unless you choose to." That night, Luis went home with a new job, a renewed identity, and a story the world wouldn't stop talking about. Within hours of the summit ending, short clips of Luis translating beside Rothwell flooded every major social media platform. One video alone, posted by a journalist, received over 2 million views by nightfall. The hashtags #JanitorInterpreter and #Luis the Linguist exploded on Twitter and LinkedIn, sparking conversations about hidden talents in low-wage jobs. Comment sections filled with awe, curiosity, and praise. People across the globe were inspired, not just by Luis's language skills, but by his courage to step forward when no one else did. Mainstream media quickly picked up the story. Headlines praised him as the unexpected hero of the global summit. Talk shows invited him for interviews. Language experts lauded his performance. Universities reached out to verify his past credentials. The story struck a nerve, because it wasn't just about business or language. It was about human potential. A reminder that brilliance isn't confined to boardrooms or titles. Luis, the janitor who saved a billionaire's speech, became a symbol of second chances, and how the overlooked can sometimes hold the answers in moments of crisis. Back home, Luis's family watched the event unfold in real time. His wife, Maria, had tuned into the summit out of curiosity, not knowing her husband would appear. As the camera zoomed in on him beside the CEO, she gasped and dropped the remote. Their 2 children stared at the screen, wide-eyed, recognizing the voice that had read them bedtime stories in multiple languages. Emotion flooded the room. Pride, shock, joy. It was more than a surprise. It was a revelation. Later that evening, when Luis walked through the door, his family ran to him in tears. They had seen him work tirelessly for years, sacrificing and never complaining. Now the world saw what they already knew, his quiet strength and brilliance. He shared the job offer with them over dinner. Maria covered her mouth in disbelief. "You deserve this," she whispered. That night, they didn't sleep much. Not out of anxiety, but wonder. After years of struggle, something had shifted. Luis wasn't just the man who cleaned buildings. He was the man who made history, by simply being prepared when the moment came. For Alexander Rothwell, the summit was meant to showcase his dominance in the corporate world. Yet it ended up being a humbling lesson in perception and value. In an exclusive post-summit interview, he spoke candidly about the moment that nearly unraveled his keynote and how Luis salvaged it. "You prepare for everything, tech glitches, protesters, even market backlash," he said. "But the human element, that's what you can't script. And sometimes, it's the most powerful." He admitted that he'd never thought twice about janitorial staff before that day. "I judged him by his uniform, just like everyone else. But Luis reminded me that you never truly know who's around you until crisis reveals them." Rothwell's decision to offer him a permanent position wasn't just a goodwill gesture, it was a strategic choice. "Talent is everywhere," he concluded, "but opportunity isn't. We're going to change that." His statement sparked internal discussions across corporate circles, questioning how companies identify and reward unseen talent. Luis hadn't just impressed Rothwell, he had challenged an entire mindset. Following the summit, Rothwell's company launched a quiet internal audit, not of finances, but of human potential. HR teams were instructed to reevaluate hiring and promotion processes, especially for overlooked roles. Training programs were expanded. Workers in janitorial, cafeteria, and admin roles were invited to share untapped skills. For the first time, resumes were pulled from maintenance staff to review for talent development programs. Luis's story wasn't just inspirational, it became policy. At the company's next all-hands meeting, Rothwell opened with a slide of Luis on stage. The message was clear: brilliance can come from anywhere. Departments were encouraged to implement mentorship channels, skill-sharing groups, and cross-training. Luis was made an ambassador for the initiative, meeting with teams across departments to speak about his journey. His humble approach helped others open up, and hidden talents began to emerge from the quietest corners of the company. A janitor's courage had sparked more than applause. It was transforming a corporate culture, one underestimated voice at a time. Luis never sought the spotlight. Even after the summit, he continued to carry himself with the same humility. When asked how he stayed so calm under pressure, he simply said, "I saw someone needed help, and I knew I could do it." But the leadership world saw something more profound. Luis had demonstrated composure, quick decision-making, and courage under high-pressure circumstances. Qualities admired in any executive. Yet he wore no title. He had no authority, just the strength of readiness. His story began to be referenced in leadership seminars and workshops. Speakers highlighted how real leadership isn't about status, but about service, about stepping up when no one else does. CEOs, team leads, and HR directors started to ask themselves tough questions. Are we ignoring the next Luis because of what they wear? In classrooms and boardrooms alike, his name became an example. Luis Rivera, once a janitor, had not only assisted a CEO, he had redefined what leadership looks like when it rises from the unexpected. As the story continued to gain traction, the public began asking a deeper question: how many more Louises are out there? Journalists launched series on hidden heroes in everyday roles. Employers were pushed to share stories of overlooked staff with exceptional skills. Educational institutions began highlighting adult learners, refugees, and working-class students with untapped potential. Louis's moment sparked a global ripple effect, a hunger for recognizing quiet excellence in unexpected places. Social media campaigns encouraged people to share stories of janitors, drivers, receptionists, and warehouse workers who had impressed them. Non-profits stepped in to provide language training and education grants to underemployed workers. Influencers, politicians, and celebrities all referenced Louis's story, not just for its feel-good value, but for the uncomfortable mirror it held up to society. Why do we assume skill must look a certain way? Why do uniforms define capability? The questions were louder now. Louis had unintentionally lit a match. The world, it seemed, was ready to see through the labels we place on one another. Louis's first official day as Rothwell's language consultant was met with fanfare. Colleagues applauded him as he walked through the office, not as the janitor who once mopped the marble floors, but as a respected member of the executive communication team. His new desk overlooked the city skyline, a view he'd once only glimpsed while cleaning late at night. There was no ego in his demeanor, just quiet gratitude and a bit of awe. He spent the day reviewing international correspondence, assisting with real-time translation during calls, and preparing briefing notes for upcoming global meetings. His transition was smooth, not because he was trained for the role recently, but because he had been training himself for years in silence. At lunch, a former co-worker from the custodial team dropped by. They hugged. "You didn't change," the co-worker said. "You just got seen." Louis nodded. He hadn't lost who he was. He had simply returned to the place he was always meant to be. A week after the summit, Louis received a call from an unknown number. On the other end was the interpreter who had vanished. He apologized profusely. He'd suffered a panic attack backstage, overwhelmed by a personal crisis, and couldn't bring himself to return. He hadn't intended to leave anyone stranded. Louis listened, not with judgment, but with compassion. "You did what you had to," he said. "So did I." There was no resentment, just understanding. They ended the call with mutual respect. Later, Louis shared the story in an internal company forum. Not to shame, but to explain how unexpected events shape outcomes. His grace toward the interpreter deepened respect for him even more. It showed the world that leadership isn't just about stepping up, it's also about how we treat those who fall behind. Louis's response reminded people that empathy is just as powerful as skill. That moment, too, became part of his growing legend. Months later, Louis was invited to speak at a global education conference. Standing at a podium where he was once an emergency backup, he now held the microphone as the main speaker. His topic: the languages we overlook. He spoke about the many types of fluency: language, emotion, sacrifice, survival. He told his story not as a fairy tale, but as a lesson in readiness and recognition. Teachers, students, and leaders from across industries gave him a standing ovation. His message was simple but profound: don't wait to be seen before you prepare. Prepare as if the world will call on you tomorrow. Because sometimes it will. That speech was translated into 12 languages and played in schools and leadership boot camps across the world. Louis had once dreamed of teaching. Now, his words were reaching farther than any classroom ever could. His voice, once overlooked, had become one of the most listened to in recent memory. The moment Louis stepped forward at the summit, he wasn't just saving a speech, he was rewriting futures. His bravery altered the path of a CEO, a corporation, and a global conversation. But beyond the headlines, the likes, and the corporate changes, His real legacy lived in quiet places. In janitors who started taking night classes. In HR teams who restructured promotion criteria. In young kids who saw their immigrant parents differently. In every person who dared to believe their preparation might one day meet opportunity. Luis never sought fame. But the world gave it to him, not for a show, but for his substance. His story endures not because he was extraordinary, but because he revealed how many extraordinary people we pass by each day. He didn't become someone new. He reminded us who he always was. And because of that, the world paused, listened, and finally heard. So the next time you walk past someone unnoticed, remember Luis Rivera, the janitor who wasn't just sweeping floors, but preparing for a moment that would one day change lives. His story isn't just his, it's a reminder that behind every uniform, every quiet face, and every overlooked soul, there might be brilliance waiting to be recognized. Talent doesn't always arrive in tailored suits. Sometimes, it's wearing work boots and carrying a mop. And when the world least expects it, it steps into the spotlight, and everything changes.